Okay, everybody. So our first lesson, we're talking about the story of creation. That is where everything starts. And it seems like a good idea to start there because, hey, we're part of creation, right? Okay. So as we start, the first thing I want to do is for things to get crazy. Okay, that's enough. How about some order? How did I obtain order? I said it, right? Who does that sound like? Hopefully that sounds like God and what you might know of the story of creation. So as we start off today, where does the Bible start, or how does the Bible start? It starts in the beginning. Sorry, folks, pastor joke, I can't resist. But the beginning that's literally the first words of Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1. That's how the Bible starts, is in the beginning. Now, Genesis is, of course, the first book of the Bible. And we start off not with people and not with a specific group of people or in a specific place, but we actually start with creation as a whole. And this seems to tell us that God's ultimate purpose that's at work eventually through the people of Israel, or also known as the Jewish people or the Hebrews. Sometimes those are the different names we have for them. And as well as the work that God will do through Jesus when we get to the New Testament, it all has to do with how God views creation. Now, the first two chapters of Genesis are all about God creating our reality. And I want to start off by highlighting a specific verse, chapter 1, verse 27. It's a great example. And we hear there, so God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. When you listen to that, are you sensing a trend? Based on that verse alone, what seems like a good descriptor or maybe a name that we could give to God? A creator, right? Because God is the one who creates. We heard it over and over again, like 3 different times just in that one little verse. If you remember from our first video, do you remember what the language is that the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures was written in? It was Hebrew, right? Kind of right there in the Hebrew scriptures, it was written in the Hebrew language. In Genesis chapter 1, when we hear over and over again that God creates something, God created it, the word is bara. It's kind of a fun word. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to go into my share screen. And here's what it looks like right here. You can see right here, this is the Hebrew, bara. Kind of a weird, funny word, but that's what it is. So this is the only time here in this first story of Genesis chapter 1, the only time that bara shows up is when God is creating our reality. So if it only shows up this one time, it seems like that's something special, right? I think it is. Now there's another Hebrew word. I'm not going to show you this one, but this is an important one I want you to remember as well. Maybe you've heard me use this because a lot of times I end up bringing this one up during worship. The word is tov. Tov is the word in the Hebrew language that means good. And this is what God calls every single step that God makes during the creation of the world. God makes something and God calls it tov. It's almost like God makes it and it's like, wow, that's really cool. I'm really happy with that. That's great. That's awesome. That's tov. I love that word. You'll hear me use it a lot. At this point now, I'm going to have you do some reading and I'll give you some instructions on it. This is something I want you to do along with your parents. So when we get to this point in just a second here, I'm going to have you stop me or put me on pause so you can read this together. Now there's a breakdown of how I want you to read this, and this will be included. So you don't have to write this down at this point, but it'll be included in the email. So I want you to read Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, and then 6 through 8, and then 9 through 13, and then 14 through 19, and then 20 through 23. And then I want you to read 24 and 25, and then pause, and then I want you to read 26 through 31. This is the breakdown of the days of creation. Now, for each day, as you're reading this together, after you put me on pause, I want you to pay attention first to what God makes, and then what God calls it, and keep track of that. I actually want you to write this down, and you're going to send this to me. This is one of the questions I'm going to have you answer. Pay attention, especially as you're going through each one of these days. I want you to pay really close attention to day 5 and what new thing God gives an instruction on during day 5. And then in day 6, I want you to pay attention to the slightly different thing that God says at the end. Now, again, write these things down, and then you're going to send those to me. We'll send them in an email. So now go ahead and put me on pause, read those together, talk about them, and then go ahead and hit resume. Okay, so hopefully you've got that done now. You've done that little bit of homework. Now at the end of day 6, God creates humanity, and what's God call us? God calls humanity very good. Not just good, not just tov, but very good. Now that's tov mahot, kind of an emphasis on it. It means very good. It's really, really good. So it seems that God really likes humanity a lot, that we're even more awesome, even more cool, like the epitome of all of this creation. It seems like God really likes people. Now, at this point, we've had 6 days of creation, but how long is a week? It's 7 days, right? 7 days, not 6, but 7. So let's pick up on the 7th day. So you're going to put me on pause again, and I want you to read chapter 2, verse 1 through 4. So chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Go ahead and put me on pause and read that together. Okay, now, what did God make, or what did God do on the 7th day? I want you to include that in your answer as well, along with the first 6 days. Now think about this. As you went through day after day after day after day, did you kind of notice a pattern? It almost seemed like the same type of thing was repeated over and over. And you know what? If you picked up on that pattern, that's good. You should. It's intentional. Now, this was actually a poem. It was this repeating cycle of creation, day by day by day, a story about how this all came to be. That is the first account of creation. But if we've got a first account, that means we probably have a second account too, right? Right, we do. Now I'm going to want you to read again, and this time you're going to read the whole thing in one batch instead of breaking it up day by day like we did for chapter 1. I'm going to have you read chapter 2, verses 4 through 25. So you're going to go ahead and put me on pause and read it together. And this time around, I want you to pay really close attention. What sounds like, how is this the same and how is it different from what we heard in the first account back in chapter 1? So pay attention to that. This is something that I'm going to have you record and send to me too. What is the same, what sounds the same, and what sounds different? So pause, read. Okay, now we're back. As you think about these two different accounts, the first account and now the second account, is there a common theme that emerges? I hope there is, because we've got similarities and we've got differences, but it still seems like God is the creator. That's that central theme, even if we have different viewpoints. Like the first account seems like a very cosmic view. We've got the creation of the cosmos and the planets and the sun and the moon and the stars and everything else in addition to the world that we're a part of. But in the second account, in chapter 2, it seems to be centered much more around humans, right? And humans' activity and action and the way that the humans experience it. So we've got these two different viewpoints, and yet God is the creator. Now, something I want you to remember, these two stories, like many of the other stories in the earliest part of the Bible, they were stories that were told from generation to generation to generation. And this went on for thousands of years before they were finally written down. And they speak of God's relationship with creation and humanity. And that God calls it all good. Now, the only thing in both of these chapters, the only thing that God says is not good is when God recognizes that the man, or Adam, or Adam is the way we said it in the Hebrew, that Adam is alone. That's the only thing that God says this isn't good. So it seems right away from the very get-go that God recognizes the importance of relationship and thinks it's not good when we are not in relationship with one another or with God. Okay, Final thing I want to bring up, and this is for a discussion for you and your parents. And again, I want you to keep track of this and send me and include this in what you send me. This is the story of creation, or actually two stories of creation. But a lot of times when we start talking about creation, that also gets lumped into a conversation or a debate or an argument sometimes with the idea of evolution. And I wonder, do you think that they contradict each other? Or can they be in conversation with one another? Can they maybe even go together? Are they just different ways of looking at the same thing from different perspectives? And do they belong in the same conversation? Now, personally, I think when we think about evolution or science, the way that science points things out to us, I think science kind of helps show us the how, but I think the scriptures maybe tell us the why. God, through creation, if we look at the very beginning and the chaos that happens at the beginning, each step, God is slowly bringing chaos towards order, even if that order is not completed yet. And I don't think it is. But God seems to do this out of a sense of delight. God takes joy in what God makes and calls it all good. So creation seems to have a purpose. And not only that, but we as humanity, we also have a purpose in it. And God uses us for this purpose, even if we're not perfect people, right? Because none of us are perfect people. We all have flaws. We all have things that we do wrong or things that don't always quite work out. We're flawed people. But what we will find over and over and over again, in story after story after story, as we continue on through the biblical narrative, is that God calls imperfect people to work with God to continue this ongoing process of bringing chaos towards order. Looking forward to our next time together.